Never once did I consider the military when I was in high school. Never once. I actually was in JROTC in my 9th grade year, and I lasted all of 1 semester before I was completely over it. I chose the Navy because I absolutely loved the water, period, end of story. Unfortunately, I didn't get to spend all that much time in or around the water in the Navy, so that's kind of misleading. But the Marine Corps I already knew wouldn't work for me because of my personality. The Army, I'm not gonna lie, I was scared to go in the Army because I already knew what would happen. And the Air Force, I don't even know why, if I even considered the Air Force or ever talked to them, but the Navy was just kind of always a natural inclination. Training with both genders, to me, growing up with nothing but boys and brothers, it wasn't very unusual. We had issues in our unit with dating. And it was very interesting to me because it wasn't until almost when boot camp was over that I realized people were actually doing that. And I couldn't figure out how, because we were never ever in a situation where you could have those private conversations. But training with them, it was no different than high school. Boot camp was terrifying. Boot camp was horrible. I cried myself to sleep every night. But an interesting side story about that. My grandmother was blind, and we had a blind factory in my hometown. And what that means is they employed blind people, mostly blind, completely blind, partially blind, people who couldn't get jobs elsewhere, and they trained them to work these machines. And they just made things like pillows and brooms and blankets and, household items and stuff like that. My grandmother died when I was 19, before I ever joined the military. And I was laying in bed one night at boot camp, and one of my bunkmates had her little flashlight out reading a letter, because we're not supposed to have lights on after a certain time. And I'm crying myself to sleep. I'm having a miserable night. And something happened. I moved the pillow to wipe my face, and I see the tag on the pillow. And it was made at the blind factory that my grandmother worked at in my hometown. And after that, boot camp just got a little easier. I mean, it didn't actually get any easier, but it just got a little bit easier to cope with, I think. We were never ever treated negatively at all. Everybody that we ever came in contact with, for the most part, was very friendly. Pretty much every guy that I knew while I was in Okinawa either ended up dating or marrying a local Japanese girl. So I guess it depends on which group you're talking about as to how they feel about the military. Well, when I got to Okinawa, I had just turned 20 years old, and in Okinawa, Japan, you can drink at 20. So I took that as my license to have fun. And my downtime was camping and drinking and going to clubs and dancing and shopping. The same stuff that I think most young teenage girls and guys like to participate in when they're somewhere far from home. Through my duties as a gate guard, I would start conversations with these people who would come through. And there was a civilian contractor who came through quite a bit, and I can't remember his name to save my life, but he was very nice. And he had special permission to go outside the wire. And one day during our vehicle searches, the conversation of going outside came up. And he was like, I can put your name on the list. I can get it approved by the provost marshal if you really want to go out in town. And so he did. And I went to the armory and I checked out my weapon, and I was in my civilian clothes, and we went to the mall in Kuwait. We had a fabulous day, and we came back, and I checked my weapon back in, and my captain happened to be my chief happened to be standing there, and he was like, where are you coming from? And I told him, and it ended up being a big deal because I never asked his permission to go. I never requested anybody's permission to go. I just kind of went. So there was a long discussion about chain of command, and I had to write an essay about the importance of following the chain of command. But even now, looking back, I would have done the exact same thing because it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. I got to sit on a camel. I got to go into a Kuwaiti mall. And Kuwait is an extremely wealthy country, and their malls are absolutely gorgeous. I had one of the, I don't know really what you call them, but in one of the shops, he made me my own personalized perfume out of a different scents. And I still have it today, actually. I don't ever wear it because once you wear it, it's gone. But It was wonderful, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I know that we have several countries in the world who require mandatory military service, and I do think that 2 years would probably be really good for many of our kids coming right out of high school, especially some of the ones that I'm teaching right now who spend most of the time in jail. I have 9th grade students who have spent more time in jail this year than in my classroom. And I definitely think that prior to college, coming out of high school, if they make it through high school, that 2 years of military service would give some of them a lot of direction. But I also believe that the military is not for everybody. The Veterans Association at Nichols is probably the best thing the school has going for it. This is an excellent school and I love it, but I was a 30-year-old student coming back to college with a child. And while I didn't necessarily see any combat, once you join the military, it's a very different experience. It's very difficult to explain. Like, you form these relationships with people, you grow up more than you thought you would, you see things differently. And when you try to go back onto a college campus with 20-year-olds and 21-year-olds, and you're 30 years old and you have a child and you've been to foreign countries, and you look around and none of these people have any idea of, their biggest concern is, why can't I find parking?